Hey everyone, and welcome. Today, we're going to go on a little journey, a journey through the different ways we think about knowledge and learning. We're going to explore what happens when we stop thinking about school subjects as separate, isolated boxes, and instead start connecting the dots.
So here's our game plan. We'll start by talking about why we need to move beyond these subject silos in the first place. Then we'll walk through a whole spectrum of approaches, from the traditional single subject focus all the way to a method for tackling huge real-world problems. By the end, you'll have a whole new toolkit for thinking about education. Sound good? Let's dive in. All right, first things first. Why do we even need to think outside our usual subject areas? I mean, it's worked for a while, right? Well, let's set the stage for why this conversation is more important now than ever.
Just think about it for a second. When we're facing a really big challenge, something like climate change or a global pandemic, does that problem care if you're a biologist or a historian or a mathematician? No way. Real-world problems are messy. They don't stay in their neat little lanes, they spill out all over the place.
This whole idea of chopping up knowledge into separate, disconnected subjects, it's actually not that old. It was really designed for a different era. But the complex problems we're dealing with today demand a more connected, a more holistic way of thinking. And that's exactly why educators are exploring this whole spectrum of learning approaches. And this right here, this is the framework we're going to use today. Think of it as a ladder of connection, the continuity of integration. We're going to start at the bottom rung with the most traditional approach, disciplinary, and climb our way up to the most deeply connected one, transdisciplinary. Each step builds on the one before it, so let's get started. We're going to start right at the foundation. Because look, before you can start connecting different subjects, you have to actually understand what those subjects are on their own. This is all about mastering the tools of each specific field. Disciplinary learning is probably what most of us grow up with. It's about getting really good inside the box of a single subject. The whole goal is to learn to think like an expert in that one field, to analyze a poem like a poet, or to look at data like a scientist. So this table breaks it down perfectly. The focus, a single subject. The purpose, to build that deep well of knowledge and master the unique methods of that field. A perfect example is something like the IB diploma program, where students take specific, separate courses like biology or history. You need this deep expertise. It's our essential starting point. Okay, moving one step up the ladder. We're taking our first step toward integration, and this is the multidisciplinary approach. The best way to think about this one is like a salad bowl. So with a multidisciplinary approach, you might have different subjects all looking at the same topic. But, and this is really the key, they don't mix. Each subject stays in its own lane, using its own tools and its own unique perspective to look at the central theme. And that brings us to that great salad bowl analogy. Picture it. You've got lettuce, tomatoes, cucumbers, all in the same bowl. They're all part of the same salad, but the tomato is still a tomato, the cucumber is still a cucumber. You can still see all the separate, distinguishable ingredients.
The keyword here is additive. The knowledge is added together side by side, but it doesn't really blend. The IB Group 4 project is a fantastic example. You might have biology, chemistry, and physics students all looking at, say, local water quality. They're collaborating, but the biology students are doing biology and the chemistry students are doing chemistry. The parts are all there, but they stay separate. Okay, now things get really interesting. We're moving from the salad bowl to the melting pot. This is the interdisciplinary approach, and this is where a real synthesis of ideas begins to happen. You see that word, integrating. That's the whole ballgame. This isn't just about putting subjects next to each other anymore. This is about actively blending their knowledge, their methods, their ways of thinking to create something totally new, a deeper understanding that you just couldn't get from one subject alone. The boundaries start to get blurry. Which of course brings us to the melting pot. Think about making a cheese fondue. Once you've melted the cheese and wine and spices together, you can't pick out the individual ingredients anymore, right? They've combined to create a completely new, unified flavor. That's exactly what interdisciplinary learning does. It creates a new, integrated understanding. This slide is so important. On the left, with multidisciplinary, the whole is basically just the sum of its parts. You just add them up. But on the right, with interdisciplinary, the whole becomes greater than the sum of its parts. It's the difference between having a team of experts who just talk to each other and having a team whose ideas fuse together to create a breakthrough. So how does just actually look in a classroom? Well, this model gives us a pretty clear roadmap. You start with good planning, you set up those big guiding questions, then you guide students as they explore those questions through different lenses, get them working together, and finally, you give them feedback on how well they actually integrated the ideas.
All right, we've made it to the top of the ladder, the far end of our continuum. If interdisciplinary is a melting pot, then transdisciplinary, well, that's like baking a whole new cake.
That word trans literally means to go beyond. Transdisciplinary learning doesn't just blur the lines between subjects, it pretty much erases them. The starting point isn't a subject at all. The starting point is a complex, real-world issue, a problem that students are genuinely curious or passionate about solving. And this brings us to our final and maybe best analogy, the cake. When you bake a cake, you mix flour, eggs, sugar. But once it's baked, you can't pick out the flour anymore, can you? They've been fundamentally transformed into something else entirely. That's the soul of transdisciplinary learning, creating a completely new way of understanding the world. This approach is tailor-made for what experts call wicked problems. Think about things like poverty or creating sustainable cities. These problems are incredibly complex, all tangled up like the strands in this yarn. There's no single simple answer. They demand that we weave together knowledge from everywhere, from different academic fields, sure, but also from community members, from artists, from people with real-world experience. So we've traveled this entire continuum, from separate subjects all the way to baking a whole new cake. Let's wrap this up by looking at these four approaches not as a competition, but as a powerful set of tools in a toolkit. See, each of these has a vital role to play. You absolutely need deep disciplinary knowledge. That's your foundation. You use a multidisciplinary approach to get a 360-degree view of a topic. You use an interdisciplinary approach to innovate and create new solutions. And you need a transdisciplinary mindset to even begin to tackle the world's biggest challenges. They aren't mutually exclusive. They're all essential tools. And really, that brings us to the most important question of all. When we look at the kind of world we're living in, and the world our kids will inherit, we have to ask ourselves, what kind of thinkers are we trying to nurture? It's not about picking just one approach and sticking to it. It's about knowing how and when to use all of these tools to help build the flexible, creative, and connected minds that our future desperately needs. Thanks so much for joining me today.